Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today's video is going to be a little bit of a long one. I'm going to be sculpting this adult Bongo head. So this is one of the dolls that it is for the Calgary Zoo. It took quite a bit of work to sculpt this head, so hence the long video, but I'll go through the whole process and yeah, if you want to see it, then keep watching. Alrighty, so I'm starting off just preparing some glass eyes for this sculpture. I actually put a whole video about eyes for art dolls over on my Patreon for my $5 and up tier. So if you want to know everything about the eyes that I use for my art dolls, then you can find that video over there. But for this one, I'm using some glass cabochon eyes, and I am painting them up in a water-based acrylic paint. And then I'll be inserting him to the head when I sculpt them. So you always want to make sure you have some reference images and just do a little bit of research about the eyes for the doll that you're sculpting, because a lot of them have different sized pupils or different coloured eyes. So yeah, always do a little bit of research before you're preparing your eyes. So for this one, I'm going to be sculpting using Sculpting Original, and it is a white Sculpting Original. It's quite soft. I quite like working with Sculpting Original. You can also get Super Sculpting, which is a sort of a beige colour that is a little bit more tougher on the hands, and you can also get Sculpting Firm, which it's quite firm and that comes in a grey colour, but I quite like working with Sculpting Original because it's a lot softer on your hands, and I like working with the softer clay. And I'm going to be sculpting over a aluminium ball armature, so this way it keeps the weight down and it sort of bulks out the sculpture itself, and you don't have to use as much material. When you're using polymer clay, you don't want your polymer clay to be too thick, because then you start having some issues with actually baking it in the oven. Just the heat can't get into the core, so you want to keep it pretty thin to begin with. And I'm just starting off by making a basic shape around the aluminium ball, and just going from there, making sure I have my reference images to my left there, and comparing the shape and the size always to my reference images to make sure everything is symmetrical and on track. So yeah, just sculpting out a really basic form to begin with, and then I can start moving on to sculpting more details, like starting with the nose. Bongo nose have kind of a deer-shaped nose. Obviously they're an antelope, so they've got a deer-shaped nose. So I have some great little close-ups of some Bongo noses that I can reference off, and I want to make sure the nose and the mouth area is the beginning, is like the base of where I can start to begin to sculpt everything else. And then once all that's done, I can move on and start sculpting the jaw area. So for noses, I sort of like to sculpt a basic shape out of the polymer clay and then add it to the actual head, and then I can start sculpting just around with my little needle tool or any little ball tools that I have. I recommend using these two tools to sculpt nostrils. They work really well. I have a couple of different sizes ball tools, and you can get a set from the Sculpey brand, or you can find them online pretty cheap, little wooden ball tools. These ones are from the Sculpey brand, and I find them really useful for making nostrils. You don't have to sort of pierce it too much, and you can sort of manipulate the clay to move around and make those the correct shape of the nostril, and then you can get in with your needle tool and just make those little lines that you can see in the nostrils there. If you have a look at animal nostrils, they have a little I don't know what you call it, but a little line that connects upwards to the snout and the nostril area. So once I've got that basic shape happy and I'm sort of happy with it, I can then add that mouth area like I said before, and it's basically just like a rough shape of a mouth, and then I can start sculpting all the details once I'm happy with the way that looks too. So a lot of fiddling around just to make sure I'm happy with the positioning and everything before I move on to the eye area. And when I am, I can start making little eye wells for my cabochons, well, the eyes that I prepared earlier. So I do that by making little balls and putting it roughly on the area where I want the eyes to go, always referencing my images to make sure that the positioning is right. You can always look at animal skulls to see the base form of the animal and where everything goes, making sure that everything is symmetrical again by looking at your reference images. So when I'm happy with that, I can add the cabochons for the eyes and make sure that they're both on the same correct angle. Otherwise, your face will end up looking a little bit wonky. So you want to turn your sculpture around in all different types of ways to make sure that it looks right and the right angle on every side. And then you can start sculpting and refining the eye area a little bit more. Now for the eyelid area, I like to roll out little snake-like wormy things for the eyelids, and then you can see I could just put it on top of that cabochon and then create different sort of expressions and eyelids once that clay is on top of the cabochon. So you don't need to have it too perfect at the start, because I always end up refining it and sort of blending it in and going over, making sure it's all symmetrical again. You can get a lot of different expressions with these eyelids. I do have a video planned, I just haven't got around to it yet. I'm a bit inundated with commissions and dolls and projects at the moment, so even my frog had to be put on hold so while I get the Calgary Zoo dolls done and a bunch of commissions done as well, but I will get that video up one day. It's coming, I promise. And then yeah, once that eyelid's on, I go ahead and refine it with that little needle tool. The eyelids, I want it to be really thin and I want it to be more realistic than a fantasy version, obviously because I'm doing smaller miniature versions of the actual animal. So yeah, just refining it again with all my tools. Once I'm happy with the basic look of my eyelids, I can start sculpting the area where I'm going to be attaching the horns or the antlers. So always important to get that positioning right. I'm going to do this in 2 different phases, so the whole face won't be baked all at once. So I'm going to be preparing the area for the antlers to go on, and I'll be baking that, and then I can work on the antlers once I've set the face in place and I'm happy with it. So just working on the eyelids again as well to making sure I have the shape and all of the definition correct. And again, a lot more refining. I've done a lot more refining on this head to make sure I'm happy with everything. So adding veins is really easy. I can do a separate video on adding veins as well. It's just simply a worm that you sort of blend into the face. It works really, really well, depending on what clay you have as well, because Sculpey Original is quite soft. It blends in really, really easily. But yeah, I could do a separate video, so just leave it in the comment in the script in the comments. And yeah, let me know if you want me to make a separate vein video as well, because that should be a really quick video. Rather than sculpting eyes and expressions. So yeah, let me know in the comments if you want a video on veining. So once that's I'm happy with that, I can start working on the ears. This will be the last bit that I do before I bake this sculpture. So the ears were quite large. I did think about putting an armature in it, but I thought I would refine it with, or reinforce it with Epoxy Sculpt once it's baked on. So I just attached the ears onto the head and went ahead and baked it. And then I can move on to the next step once everything is all solid and set. So first, before I baked it, I wanted to set some little holes for the antlers to go into. So I am using an armature for these antlers because they're quite thin, so they do need an armature in it, and it makes it more, it gives it a bit more strength. So these dolls are going to be handled, and those antlers need an armature in it to have that strength. So before I bake it, I also wanted to add a little bit of wrinkling around the ears as well. So if you've seen a Bongo, they have a little bit of wrinkling around the ears. So this one's not going to have fur applied to the face, so I need this face to be I need it to be more refined and have all the details on it, because I won't be putting any fur onto the face. So I need that detail to be on the actual clay sculpture, because I will be painting it and yeah, not attaching the faux fur. Alrighty, so I'm going to pop that in the oven, and now it has come out and baked. I had a little bit of issues with some cracking on the ears, like I thought would happen. That's why I wanted to reinforce it, but that's no problem at all, because I can I'm going to be adding some Epoxy Sculpt in there, and that will really reinforce the ears and they won't fall off or anything like that. And so I can move on to before I do that, I wanted to finish all of the polymer clay areas first before I put any Epoxy Sculpt in the oven, because I don't know how that goes. Epoxy Sculpt it's got chemicals in it, and I don't really want Epoxy Sculpt in my oven. So I decided to just loosely attach the ears, loosely reinforce the ears, and move on with sculpting the antlers. And then once that's all baked, I can move on to all the Epoxy Sculpt stuff. So I'm basically just put the wire armature inside of those holes that I did before, and then I can slowly add the polymer clay up the armature, and yeah, start sculpting all of the details for the antlers. One thing to keep in mind when you're using Sculpey Original and armatures soft armatures like this, when it doesn't have any texture, it has a little bit of a hard time sticking to it. So I can also recommend maybe when you're using a armature like this, you can run your needle nose pliers through it and just create a little bit of texture onto the onto the aluminium or the wire. That way the polymer clay has something to grab onto, or you can just be really careful and not sort of poke it around a little bit like I did here. I didn't scratch up my armature, but yeah, I just thought I would carefully add the polymer clay onto the armature. It worked for me, but sometimes you can get little air pockets in there, and so just always something to keep in mind that. So a lot of refining I've done on the antlers as well. I've created 2 little ridges on the front. It's always important, again, to look at your reference photos and see how things are actually made and how they look and what angles they have. So the Bongo horns have 2 little ridges at the front that give it a nice little symmetrical look. I can then add little details like the little bits of fur around the bottom of the antlers, and also some little texture on the horns as well, which I'm using my little loop tool for. Righty, so epoxy sculpt time. I've baked the whole head, so that's all baked, ready to go. Don't need to put it into the oven anymore, and don't need to add any more polymer clay. So I'm going to be working with the epoxy sculpt this time. So I have a whole video on epoxy sculpt. If you're not familiar with this product, it's really, really good, and it's really, really strong as well. So I never remember to link things in my description box, but it's on my channel, and it's a whole video about epoxy sculpt. So if you're unfamiliar, you can check that out. So basically, I'm just reinforcing the antlers at the base. I was originally going to do this as well, but the way the antlers baked, I wasn't really happy with the angle that it was, so I pulled one of them off very, very carefully and sort of repositioned the way the antlers were sitting, and then I could go in and add that epoxy sculpt underneath to get that lift that it needed, and also reinforce the bottom of the connection of the antler and the wire armature. And then epoxy sculpt is really great because you can add texture as well, and it can be smoothed out with water, so it works really well. And then I can move on to reinforcing the ear area once I finished the antler area. So again, it's the same sort of thing. I'm just feeding in the epoxy sculpt into the areas that need to be feeded to, and then I will be reinforcing the whole area in that epoxy sculpt, so it's nice and strong. So this is what we have. I added a ball and socket armature. I mistakenly left it to dry, resting on the ball and socket armature, so that's why you can see that little bit of lift at the bottom of the where the armature connects. But I just went in and just added more epoxy sculpt and made it a lot more secure. Anyway, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks to my patrons for supporting me. I really appreciate it. If you want to check me out on Instagram and Facebook, you can find me at Creatures of Nat, and my store at creaturesofnat.com, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!